Ma'am, this is your last warning. Stand up and leave now or you're going to jail.
I am a paying customer. You have no probable cause and you are unlawfully detaining me.
You don't get to argue the law with me.
Then you're about to violate the Constitution on camera and you will regret it.
The woman sitting at table 14 near the window was not causing a disturbance. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't harassing other customers. She was Judge Eleanor Vance, a 62-year-old jurist with a reputation for absolute intellectual rigor and a terrifying memory for case law. She had spent the morning presiding over arraignments for federal felonies, and she was currently enjoying a quiet lunch of grilled salmon and sparkling water. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant bun. To any objective observer, she looked exactly like what she was, a distinguished professional taking a well-earned break. But Officer Braden, 29 years old, and fueled by a toxic mix of arrogance and implicit bias, didn't see a federal judge. He saw a black woman sitting in an upscale bistro in a predominantly white affluent district, and he had already decided she didn't belong there. Braden had been on the force for 6 years. Twice. He was known in the precinct for being proactive, a euphemism that his sergeant used to describe Braden's tendency to escalate minor situations into major constitutional violations. Before we unravel this catastrophic failure of judgment that would cost the city millions and rewrite department policy, I need you to do something. If you believe that no citizen should be harassed simply for existing in a public space, hit that like button right now. It helps us get these stories out to more people. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? This story is going to make your blood boil, and you need to see how it ends. Eleanor Vance had chosen the Gilded Oak because it was quiet. She had a stack of case files on her iPad which she was reviewing while she ate. She was known in the Southern District for her fairness. She was the judge who would toss out evidence if the police obtained it illegally, but she was also the judge who would hand down maximum sentences for violent offenders who preyed on their communities. She believed in the law. She believed in the system even when it was flawed because she believed it could be fixed from the inside. At 12:45 p.m., the restaurant manager, a man named Gregory, had called the non-emergency line. Gregory was nervous and possessed an unfortunate habit of judging customers by their skin color rather than their conduct. He had told the dispatcher there was a woman loitering at a table and refusing to order, despite the fact that Eleanor had already been served and was halfway through her meal. Gregory just wanted the table back for a group of 4 that had just walked in without a reservation. Instead of managing his seating chart, he weaponized the police. Officer Braden arrived 4 minutes later. He didn't park in a designated spot. He pulled his cruiser right up to the curb, blocking the valet lane lights flashing silently. It was a power move. He adjusted his belt, checked his reflection in the glass door, and marched inside. He didn't ask the manager for details. He didn't observe the subject for behavior. He walked straight toward table 14 with his chest puffed out and his hand resting on his taser. Judge Vance saw him coming. She didn't look up immediately. She finished highlighting a paragraph on her screen, took a sip of her water, and only then did she raise her eyes. She had seen thousands of police officers in her courtroom. She knew the difference between an officer who was there to serve and protect and an officer who was there to intimidate. She knew exactly which category Kyle Braden fell into before he even opened his mouth. The bistro was buzzing with the low murmur of lunchtime conversation, the clinking of silverware and the soft jazz playing over the speakers. All of that stopped the moment Officer Braden reached table 14. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't ask a question. He issued a command. "Ma'am, you need to grab your things and come with me. We're leaving." Eleanor Vance placed her fork down gently on the edge of her plate. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with her linen napkin and folded it on her lap. She looked Braden in the eye, her expression calm, unreadable. "I beg your pardon, officer," she said. Her voice was modulated the same tone she used when overruling a frantic defense attorney. I am in the middle of my lunch. Is there an emergency? Braden scoffed. It was a sound of dismissal loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. The management wants you gone. You're trespassing, so let's not make this a scene. Up. Now. Trespassing. Eleanor repeated the word slowly, testing its weight. Officer, trespassing requires that I remain on private property without permission. I was seated by the hostess. I ordered from the waiter. I have been served my food for which I intend to pay. I am a paying customer conducting lawful business. Under what statute am I trespassing? Braden wasn't used to people quoting statutes. He was used to people getting flustered, scared, or angry. The manager says you're loitering. That means you gotta go. I'm not gonna ask you again. I see, Eleanor said. She tapped the screen of her iPad, saving her work. You are acting on a complaint from the manager. Did you verify if the complaint had merit? Did you ask to see my receipt? Did you observe me disrupting the peace? I don't need to observe anything. Braden snapped, his voice rising. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. The owner of this property revoked your permission to be here. That makes it trespassing. If you don't leave voluntarily, you leave in cuffs. Those are your options. The other diners were watching now. A couple at the next table, two elderly women having tea, looked terrified. A businessman across the aisle had his phone out recording. Eleanor noticed the phone. She gave a microscopic nod, acknowledging the witness. Officer, Eleanor said, I am going to finish my meal. Then I will pay my bill. Then I will leave. I have a court session at 2:00 p.m. that I cannot be late for. I suggest you speak to the manager again and clarify why exactly he wants a quiet paying patron removed. Braden's face flushed a deep, angry red. He felt his authority slipping away, eroded by the calm demeanor of this woman who refused to be intimidated. To him, her calmness felt like insolence. You don't tell me what to do, Braden growled. I'm conducting an investigation into a disturbance. There is no disturbance, Eleanor corrected him, except the one you are creating. You are currently detaining me. For a detention to be lawful under Terry v. Ohio, you must have reasonable, articulable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. Eating salmon is not a crime. Sitting in a restaurant is not a crime. So I will ask you again, what is your reasonable suspicion? Braden's hand tightened on his duty belt. He leaned down, placing both hands on the table, looming over her. You want to play lawyer, fine. We can play lawyer downtown. You're refusing a lawful order. That's obstruction. An order based on an unlawful premise is not a lawful order, Eleanor said, her voice turning steel-hard. And you are perilously close to violating Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. Deprivation of rights under color of law. I strongly suggest you take a step back and reassess the situation. Braden laughed. It was a harsh, incredulous sound. Section 242. You memorize that from a TV show, lady. I'm the police. I determine what's lawful here, not you. Stand up. I will not, Eleanor said. Last warning, Braden said, reaching for his handcuffs. Officer, Eleanor said, you are making a mistake that will end your career. I am asking you to call your supervisor. I don't need a supervisor to handle a trespasser, Braden spat. Turn around. The atmosphere in the Gilded Oak had shifted from uncomfortable to suffocating. The air was thick with tension. Every eye in the restaurant was fixed on table 14. The businessman recording the encounter shifted his angle to get a better view of Braden's badge number. Eleanor Vance remained seated. She knew the law better than she knew the layout of her own home. She knew that she had the right to remain in a public accommodation free from discrimination. She knew that the manager's request to remove her was likely based on race, given that she was the only black patron in the establishment and had done nothing to warrant eviction. And she knew that Officer Braden was acting as an unwitting agent of that discrimination, compounding it with his own lack of training and temperament. Officer, Eleanor said, keeping her hands visible on the table. You are escalating a civil dispute into a criminal matter without probable cause. You have not asked for my side of the story. You have not interviewed witnesses. You simply marched in here and demanded I leave. That is the definition of arbitrary and capricious enforcement. I'm done talking, Braden said. He moved around the table. You're under arrest for trespassing and resisting an officer. Resisting requires physical opposition or delay, Eleanor stated clearly. I am verbally asserting my Fourth Amendment rights. Verbal disagreement with a police officer is not a crime. The Supreme Court made that very clear in City of Houston versus Hill. Braden paused. He wasn't a scholar, but he knew that most people didn't cite Supreme Court cases off the cuff. For a fleeting second, a warning bell rang in the back of his mind. Who is this lady? But his ego was too loud, drowning out the caution. He couldn't back down now. If he walked away, he would look weak in front of the manager, in front of the diners, in front of the camera phone pointed at him. I don't care what you think the Supreme Court said, Braden retorted. In this jurisdiction, when I tell you to move, you move. Now are you going to identify yourself, or am I booking you as a Jane Doe? I am happy to identify myself, Eleanor said. But understand that my identification will not justify this stop. It will only confirm the gravity of your error. ID. Now, Braden demanded, holding out his hand. Eleanor moved slowly. I am reaching for my purse on the chair next to me. I am removing my wallet. She narrated her movements, a habit from years of reading police reports where officers claimed a suspect made a furtive movement. She would give him no excuse. She opened her leather wallet. Inside, nestled in a custom cutout, was her identification. But she didn't pull out her driver's license first. She pulled out her Federal Judicial Commission credentials. It was a heavy laminated card with a holographic seal of the United States Courts, her photograph, and the bold text, United States Magistrate Judge. She held it up. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am a federal magistrate for the Southern District. You are currently interfering with a federal judicial officer. Braden took the card. He looked at it. He looked at the seal. He looked at the photo. Any competent officer would have stopped right there. They would have handed the card back, apologized profusely, and exited the restaurant backward. But Braden wasn't competent. He was angry, and he was convinced he was right. His brain couldn't process the information. A federal judge. Here eating lunch alone. It didn't fit his narrative. This looks fake, Braden said. He tossed the card onto the table like it was a playing card. You can buy these online. Nice try. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. That is official government identification. You can verify it by calling the federal marshal's office, or simply dispatch. I'm not calling anyone for a fake ID, Braden sneered. So you're impersonating a judge now too. That's another charge. Keep digging that hole, lady. Officer, the man recording the video spoke up. That looks real to me. You might want to check that. Mind your business or you're next, Braden shouted at the witness, pointing a finger. He turned back to Eleanor. Stand up, hands behind your back. You are refusing to verify my credentials, Eleanor asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I'm refusing to play your games. You're under arrest. Braden grabbed her left arm and yanked her upward. The physical contact changed everything. Up until that moment, it had been a verbal altercation, a battle of wits and laws. But the moment Officer Kyle Braden laid his hands on Judge Eleanor Vance, he crossed a line from which there was no return. Eleanor didn't fight him. She allowed herself to be pulled from the chair. She was 62 years old with a bad knee, but she stood as tall as she could. I am not resisting, she announced loudly for the benefit of the camera. I am complying with your physical force. I am asserting that this arrest is unlawful and without probable cause. Stop talking, Braden barked. He spun her around roughly. He pulled her arms behind her back, twisting her shoulders at an angle that caused a sharp intake of breath. You are hurting me. Eleanor said calmly. "There is no need for this level of force. I am compliant." "Stop tensing up then," Braden lied. She wasn't tensing. He was just being rough because he wanted to dominate the situation. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic ratchet, ratchet, ratchet sound of the cuffs tightening echoed in the silent restaurant. He cuffed her tight. Too tight. "Check for spacing," Eleanor said. "You are required to ensure there is space for a finger between the cuff and the wrist." "They're fine," Braden said, dismissing her. He didn't check. He grabbed her by the bicep, his fingers digging into the fabric of her suit jacket. "Let's go." As he marched her toward the door, the restaurant manager, Gregory, stood by the host stand. He looked pale. He had wanted the loiterer gone, but he hadn't expected handcuffs. He hadn't expected a federal judge. He saw the way the other customers were looking at him with disgust. "Is this necessary?" Gregory whispered as they passed. "She wouldn't listen," Braden said loudly, acting the hero. "I handled it." Eleanor stopped briefly as they passed the man with the phone. She looked directly into the lens. "My name is Judge Eleanor Vance. I am being arrested by Officer Braden of the Metro Police Department. Please keep that video safe." "I got you, Judge," the man said. "It's already uploading to the cloud." Braden shoved her forward. "Move." They exited the restaurant into the bright afternoon sun. The valet attendants stared. People walking their dogs stopped to watch. It was the ultimate humiliation, a woman who had spent her life upholding the law now being paraded like a common criminal because a young officer couldn't check his ego or his bias. Braden opened the back door of his cruiser. It was a cage. The seat was hard plastic, designed to be hosed down. It smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant. "Watch your head," Braden said, not actually helping her. Eleanor had to maneuver awkwardly to get inside with her hands cuffed behind her back. It was painful. Her knee throbbed. Braden slammed the door. He walked around to the driver's seat, feeling a rush of adrenaline. He felt powerful. He had taken control. He had removed the problem. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch Unit 4 Alpha. One female in custody, transporting to central booking. Charges trespassing, resisting disorderly conduct, impersonating an official." "Copy 4 Alpha," the dispatcher replied. Braden glanced in the rearview mirror. Eleanor was sitting perfectly straight, her eyes closed, her breathing controlled. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was meditating on the steps she would take to dismantle this department. Braden laughed to himself. "Hope you enjoyed your lunch," he taunted. Eleanor opened her eyes. They were cold, hard flint. "I hope you have a good lawyer, Officer Braden. You are going to need one." Yeah. Tell it to the judge," Braden said, laughing at his own joke. "I am the judge," Eleanor replied. And then she fell silent. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. To Officer Braden, it was a victory lap. To Judge Vance, it was an eternity of discomfort and seething, focused resolve. The handcuffs were digging into the soft tissue of her wrists. Her shoulders ached, but she refused to slump. She refused to look defeated. She mentally cataloged every bump in the road, every reckless lane change Braden made, every comment he muttered under his breath. When they arrived at the precinct, Braden pulled into the sally port. The heavy garage door rumbled shut behind them, sealing them in the concrete intake area. He hauled Eleanor out of the car. "Let's go. Walk," he commanded. He led her through the heavy steel doors into the processing area. It was a chaotic room filled with officers, clerks, and a few other arrestees handcuffed to benches. The air smelled of ink and industrial cleaner. The intake sergeant was a man named Thomas Miller. Miller was 55, a 30-year veteran who was counting the days to retirement. He had seen it all. He was sitting behind the high desk sipping coffee when Braden marched Eleanor up to the counter. "What do we have here, Kyle?" Sergeant Miller asked, looking tired. "Trespassing at the Gilded Oak," Braden announced proudly. "Refused to leave, resisted, claimed she was some kind of judge, handed me a fake ID. Miller looked at Eleanor. He squinted. Then his eyes went wide. He put his coffee cup down, slowly. He knew Eleanor Vance. He had testified in her courtroom 3 months ago on a drug trafficking case. He had seen the way she commanded the bench. He had seen the respect the prosecutors and defense attorneys gave her. "Kyle," Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. "Uncuff her." "What?" Braden blinked. "Sarge, she's non-compliant. I haven't processed her yet." "I said take the cuffs off. Right, now." Miller stood up. He walked around the desk. "Sarge, she's a suspect. She tried to pass a fake Fed ID." "That is not a fake ID, you moron," Miller roared. The entire booking room went silent. "That is Magistrate Judge Eleanor Vance. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Braden froze. The color drained from his face. He looked from Miller to Eleanor. Eleanor stood there, wrists bound, gazing at Braden with an expression of absolute pity. "He refused to verify my credentials, Sergeant," Eleanor said calmly. "He refused to call a supervisor. He used excessive force during the arrest. My wrists are injured." Miller pulled the keys from Braden's belt. His hands were shaking as he unlocked the cuffs. "Judge Vance, I am so sorry. I don't know what I have no words." The cuffs clicked open. Eleanor brought her hands forward. Her wrists were bruised, deep red marks encircling the dark skin. She rubbed them slowly. "Thank you, Sergeant Miller," she said. "I would like to speak to the watch commander and the chief immediately." "Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am." Miller turned to Braden. "Give me your gun and your badge. Go sit in the break room. Don't speak to anyone. Don't touch your phone. You are done." "But—" Braden started, his voice a squeak. "Now!" Miller screamed. Braden placed his weapon and badge on the counter. He looked like a child who had broken a priceless vase. He walked away. His shoulders slumped as the reality of his situation began to crash down on him. The atmosphere in the precinct transformed instantly. It went from a routine afternoon to a 5-alarm fire. Officers who were joking around a moment ago were now scrambling to look busy or disappear. Nobody wanted to be anywhere near the fallout of arresting a federal judge. Sergeant Miller escorted Eleanor to the captain's office. He offered her a chair, water, and ice pack for her wrists. "I'm fine, Sergeant," Eleanor said, declining the ice. "I want the evidence preserved. That is my priority." "It's being done, Judge. I've already locked down the body cam footage from the server so it can't be deleted or edited. I've pulled the dispatch logs." Captain Robert Henderson burst into the office 5 minutes later. He was breathless. He had been at a Rotary Club luncheon when he got the call. "Judge Vance," Henderson said, extending a hand that Eleanor did not shake. "Judge, I am mortified. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." "It was not a misunderstanding, Captain," Eleanor said, her voice filling the room. "It was a violation of my civil rights. It was an unlawful arrest based on racial profiling. Your officer saw a black woman in a nice restaurant and decided she didn't belong. He ignored the law. He ignored my identification. He ignored common sense. We are going to launch a full internal investigation," Henderson promised. "Officer Braden has been relieved of duty pending the outcome." "That is the bare minimum," Eleanor said. "I want the dash cam footage. I want the body cam footage. I want the 911 call from the restaurant manager. I want Officer Braden's disciplinary file, and I want to know why a man with his temperament was allowed to carry a badge in the first place." "You'll have full cooperation, Judge. Please let us drive you home, or back to your car." "My car is at the restaurant," Eleanor said. "I assume it has been towed." Henderson winced. I will check. If it has been towed," Eleanor said, "you will retrieve it. You will pay for it, and you will have it delivered to my residence." "Absolutely." Eleanor stood up. "I am going to leave now, Captain. I am going to go home. I am going to ice my wrists, And then I am going to call my attorney. By tomorrow morning, the Southern District will be filing a formal complaint. This isn't just about me. If he did this to a federal judge, imagine what he has been doing to people who don't have my power, people who can't fight back." "I understand," Henderson said. He looked defeated. He knew the department was about to be turned upside down. The next morning, the story didn't just break. It exploded. The video from the restaurant had gone viral overnight. It showed clearly, undeniably, the calm demeanor of Judge Vance and the aggressive bullying tactics of Officer Braden. The internet was on fire. Judge Vance was trending #1 globally. The mayor called a press conference at 10:00 a.m. He stood next to the police chief, both of them looking somber. They apologized to Judge Vance. They apologized to the community. They announced the immediate termination of Officer Kyle Braden. They thought that would be enough to stop the bleeding. It wasn't. Judge Vance filed her lawsuit at 11:00 a.m. It was a masterpiece of legal writing. It didn't just sue Braden, it sued the city for failure to train, failure to supervise, and for maintaining a culture of impunity. It cited Braden's previous complaints, 4 of them in 3 years, all involving minority citizens, all dismissed by Internal Affairs as unfounded. They ignored the warning signs, Eleanor told a reporter from the Times in an exclusive interview. They taught him that his badge was a shield against accountability. Well, that shield is broken. The Department of Justice, prompted by the high profile of the victim, announced a pattern or practice investigation into the police department. They weren't just looking at Braden anymore. They were looking at everyone. Every stop, every search, every arrest. The restaurant. The Gilded Oak was not spared. The manager, Gregory, was fired within 24 hours. The owners issued a public apology and pledged to donate a percentage of their profits to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. But the damage was done. Protesters lined the sidewalk outside the bistro for weeks. They held signs that read, "Dining while black is not a crime." Officer Braden, now former Officer Braden, sat in his apartment with the blinds drawn. He had lost his job. He had lost his pension. He was facing criminal charges for assault and deprivation of rights. His union representative had told him bluntly, "We can't defend this, Kyle. You arrested a federal magistrate. You're on your own." He watched the news. He saw the video of himself. For the first time, stripped of his uniform and his power, he looked at his actions from the outside. He saw the bully. He saw the racism. He saw the stupidity. 6 months later, the city settled with Judge Eleanor Vance for $1.2 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a single arrest in the city's history. Eleanor didn't keep a dime. She created the Vance Legal Defense Initiative, a scholarship fund for young minority law students, and a grant program for legal aid clinics that represented victims of police misconduct. "I don't need the city's money," she said at the press conference announcing the foundation. "I have a good job. I have a pension. This money belongs to the people who were stopped by officers like Kyle Braden and didn't have a voice. It belongs to the people who were forced to plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit because they couldn't afford bail. It belongs to the community." The police department underwent a radical transformation. Under the federal consent decree, they implemented mandatory body cameras with strict penalties for turning them off. They revised their use of force policies. They created a civilian oversight board with the power to subpoena officers. Judge Vance returned to the bench. But she was different. She was even more rigorous. When officers testified in her courtroom, she grilled them. She demanded specifics. She watched body cam footage with a hawk's eye. She became a guardian of the Fourth Amendment, not just in theory, but in practice. The incident at the Gilded Oak became a case study in law schools and police academies across the country. It was titled The Vance Effect. It taught a simple lesson. No one is above the law and no one is beneath its protection. As for Kyle Braden, he pled guilty to a misdemeanor deprivation of rights charge to avoid federal prison time. He received 3 years of probation and is permanently barred from working in law enforcement. He works in a warehouse now loading boxes. Every day he answers to a supervisor who demands respect. He has learned the hard way what it feels like to be powerless. This story matters because it exposes the fragility of our rights. Judge Vance was protected because she had a title, a badge of her own, and the knowledge to fight back. But what if she had been a nurse, a teacher, a grandmother just trying to enjoy a meal? Would the outcome have been the same? That is the question that should keep us all up at night. Justice shouldn't depend on who you are or who you know. It should be blind. But as we saw sometimes, justice has to take off the blindfold and stare down the barrel of a camera lens to get the truth. Thank you for reading this story. It's a heavy one, but it's real. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power dynamics in our society, please drop a comment below. Have you ever been judged based on your appearance? How would you have reacted if you were in Judge Vance's shoes? And please subscribe to the channel. We are committed to telling the stories of justice, accountability, and the fight for a fairer world. Your support helps us keep the lights on and the truth loud. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and know your rights.
Hey, you! What's in the cup and why are you sitting here?
Coffee. I'm sitting in a public park. Am I being detained?
I need your ID. Now.
Then articulate a crime, officer. Because right now this stop is unlawful.
The body camera footage that would eventually force the resignation of a police chief and cost the city of Chicago nearly $1 million began in silence. There was no audio for the first 30 seconds, just the buffer, but the image was crystal clear. It showed a pristine, sun-drenched morning in Millennium Park. The grass was manicured, the city skyline gleamed in the background, and the benches were mostly empty. On one of those benches sat a man who was arguably the most powerful law enforcement official in the entire state of Illinois. And Officer Kyle Miller, a 29-year-old patrolman with a history of aggression that had been overlooked for far too long, was walking straight toward him. Marcus Thorne was 58 years old, dressed in a tailored navy wool coat over a charcoal suit. He wasn't wearing a tie. It was his one small rebellion on a Tuesday morning before heading into the relentless grind of the Attorney General's office. In his hand, he held a simple paper coffee cup from a local roaster. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't bothering anyone. He was simply existing in a public space, reviewing mental notes for an upcoming racketeering case against a sophisticated interstate theft ring. Thorne had spent 30 years climbing the legal ladder from public defender to prosecutor to federal judge and finally to the elected position of state attorney general. He was a man who knew the penal code better than he knew the back of his own hand. But Officer Miller didn't see the state attorney general. He didn't see a legal scholar. Through the lens of his own biases and the adrenaline of a slow morning shift, he saw a black man sitting alone in a high-traffic tourist area holding a cup. In Miller's mind, this wasn't a citizen enjoying the city he served. It was a loitering subject, a potential vagrant trying to blend in, or perhaps someone drinking alcohol in public. It was an assumption born of instinct, but it was the wrong kind of instinct, the kind that legal experts and civil rights activists had been warning about for decades. Before we get into the details of this infuriating encounter, I need you to take a second. Pause and look at where you are right now. Are you safe? Do you feel free? Now imagine that freedom being stripped away simply because someone with a badge decided you didn't look like you belonged. If you believe that law enforcement should be held to the highest standard of conduct, smash that subscribe button right now. We cover the stories that the mainstream media often glosses over. You need to see this. Officer Miller's boots crunched on the gravel path. Thorne didn't look up immediately. He was deep in thought, savoring the bitterness of the dark roast coffee. He had dealt with police officers his entire adult life. He respected the profession. He had attended their funerals, authorized their overtime grants, and defended their qualified immunity when it was justified. But he also knew the dark side of the badge. He had prosecuted officers who beat suspects in holding cells. He had signed the indictments for detectives who planted evidence. He knew that for every 100 good officers, there was one who viewed the public as the enemy. He didn't know yet that Officer Miller was that one. Miller stopped 3 feet from the bench. He stood with his thumbs hooked into his vest, a stance of dominance that he had practiced in the academy mirror but had never quite earned in the streets. He loomed over the seated man, casting a shadow across Thorne's face. The silence stretched for a moment too long. Thorne slowly raised his head, his expression calm, his eyes intelligent and weary. He didn't smile, but he didn't scowl either. He just waited. "Morning," Miller said, but it wasn't a greeting. It was a challenge. The tone was flat hard and devoid of the protect and serve courtesy that was supposed to be the department's motto. "Good morning, officer," Thorne replied. His voice was a deep baritone, the voice of a man who commanded courtrooms with a whisper. "Can I help you with something?" "You can start by telling me what's in the cup," Miller snapped, nodding toward the paper cup in Thorne's hand. Thorne looked at the cup, then back at the officer. He blinked, genuinely confused by the pettiness of the opening salvo. "Coffee," Thorne said. "Black, no sugar." "You sure about that?" Miller took a half-step closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "We've had complaints about guys drinking out here. Public consumption is a citation, sometimes an arrest depending on how the subject acts." Thorne tightened his grip on the cup slightly. He looked around the empty park. There was no one else nearby to have made a complaint. This was a fishing expedition, plain and simple. "I assure you, officer, it is coffee. And since I am not engaging in any criminal activity, I'm going to go back to enjoying my morning." This was the moment. The off-ramp was right there. Miller could have nodded, said, "Just checking," and walked away. But he didn't. He couldn't. His authority had been gently brushed aside, and his ego wouldn't allow it. He wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in compliance, and he was about to destroy his life to get it. The interaction had lasted less than 60 seconds, but the dynamic was already set in stone. On one side, a man who represented the pinnacle of state law enforcement armed with decades of constitutional knowledge. On the other, a young officer with a chip on his shoulder and a fundamental misunderstanding of the Fourth Amendment. "I didn't say you could go back to anything," Officer Miller said, his voice rising just enough to attract the attention of a couple walking their dog 50 yards away. "I'm conducting an investigation here. I need to see some identification." Marcus Thorne didn't move to reach for his wallet. He didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his posture relaxed, but his mind sharpening into a razor's edge. This was the dance he knew so well from case files, but rarely experienced from this side of the bench. "Officer," Thorne said, his tone dropping an octave, becoming professorial, "you are requesting my identification. Is that a request, or is it a lawful order?" Miller blinked. Most people just handed it over. "It's an order. I need to know who you are, and I need to verify you don't have any outstanding warrants." "For an order to be lawful," Thorne said, reciting the statute from memory as if he were reading it from a book, "you must have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime, am currently committing a crime, or am about to commit a crime. Terry v. Ohio, Delaware v. Prouse. You suspect me of public consumption of alcohol. I have told you this is coffee. You have no evidence to the contrary, no smell of alcohol, no slurred speech, no erratic behavior. So on what specific facts are you basing your detention?" Miller's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. He wasn't used to suspects citing Supreme Court case law. He was used to fear. He was used to confusion. He wasn't equipped for a lecture. "Don't play lawyer with me," Miller spat out. "I'm not asking you again. Stand up, put the cup down, and give me your ID." Thorne remained seated. He took a deliberate sip of his coffee, maintaining eye contact over the rim of the cup. It was a move of supreme confidence, bordering on arrogance, but entirely within his rights. "I am not playing officer." I am asserting my rights under the Illinois Constitution and the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Illinois is not a stop-and-identify state unless there is a valid detention based on reasonable suspicion. You have none. Therefore, I am not obligated to identify myself. Am I free to go, or are you detaining me? You're detained. Miller barked his hand, drifting toward the handcuffs on his belt. For what crime? Disorderly conduct, failure to obey a lawful order, and suspicion of public intoxication. Miller was stacking charges now, throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. He was digging a hole, and instead of climbing out, he was asking for a bigger shovel. Thorne shook his head slowly, almost sadly. Officer, look at me. Look at my suit. Look at my demeanor. Do I look like a public intoxication case to you? If you arrest me, you will be filing a false police report. That is a felony. Do you understand the implications of that? Are you threatening me? Miller stepped back and keyed his radio. Dispatch, show me out with a non-compliant male subject at Millennium Park. Send me a backup unit. The escalation was palpable. A jogger stopped to watch. The couple with the dog pulled out a phone. The lens of public scrutiny was now focused on Officer Miller, but he was too blinded by rage to see it. He saw only a defiant black man who refused to submit to his authority. I am not threatening you, Thorne said calmly. I am warning you. I am trying to save your career. You are making a mistake that you will not be able to undo. Walk away. Just walk away. Stand up! Miller screamed, finally snapping. Turn around! Thorne sighed. He placed the coffee cup gently on the bench next to him. He knew exactly how this would play out now. He could have pulled out his badge, the gold shield that identified him as the Attorney General. He could have dropped names. He could have ended it instantly, but Marcus Thorne was a man of principle. If this officer treated the Attorney General this way, how did he treat the janitor? How did he treat the unemployed mechanic? How did he treat the teenager walking home from school? Thorne decided then and there that he wouldn't use his badge to escape. He would let the system work or fail exactly as it would for any other citizen. He would be the test case. He stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible. I am complying with your physical commands under duress, Thorne stated clearly for the benefit of the bystander's camera. I am not resisting, but I am stating for the record that this is an unlawful arrest. Put your hands behind your back, Miller growled, spinning Thorne around with unnecessary force. You're making a mistake, son, Thorne whispered the first time he had used a colloquialism. A very big mistake. Have you ever seen someone so confident in their wrongness that it made you cringe? Officer Miller was about to destroy his life over a cup of coffee. Let me know in the comments if you think police officers need more training on the Constitution. Type yes if you think they do. The sensation of cold steel ratcheting around one's wrists is something you never forget. For Marcus Thorne, it was a sensation he hadn't felt in 40 years, not since a protest in his college days. But now, as the state attorney general, the feeling was different. It wasn't fear. It was a cold, calculating fury. He felt the metal bite into his skin as Officer Miller squeezed the cuffs tighter than necessary, a petty, punitive measure known in the force as compliance via discomfort. You're tight on the wrists, officer, Thorne said, his voice devoid of pain, merely stating a fact. Don't move and it won't hurt, Miller retorted, grabbing Thorne by the elbow. By now, a small crowd had gathered. The morning commuters, the tourists, the joggers, they had formed a semicircle. 3 phones were raised, recording every second. Miller, fueled by adrenaline and the false confidence of the badge, puffed his chest out. He thought he was performing for the public, showing them how he handled trouble. He had no idea he was starring in his own career obituary. What is he being arrested for? A woman in workout gear shouted from 10 feet away. He was just sitting there. Back up, ma'am, Miller shouted, pointing a finger at her. Interfering with a police investigation is an arrestable offense. Back up. Thorne turned his head slightly. Do not engage him, ma'am. Keep recording. Please, just keep recording. Shut up. Miller shoved Thorne forward, forcing him off balance. Walk. Now. They began the march toward the patrol car parked on the perimeter of the park. Every step was a violation of Thorne's civil rights, and every step added another 0 to the eventual settlement check. Thorne's mind was racing, cataloging the procedural errors. No Miranda warning read, no articulation of the crime, excessive force during handcuffing, retaliatory charge stacking. It was a textbook example of everything his office was trying to root out of the Chicago Police Department. As they reached the squad car, a second unit arrived. Officer Sarah Jenkins, a younger officer with only 2 years on the force, stepped out. She looked at the scene, her partner red-faced and aggressive, the suspect calm, well-dressed, and dignified even in handcuffs. Her stomach dropped. She had good instincts, and her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. "What do we have, Kyle?" Jenkins asked, approaching cautiously. "Disorderly. Failure to ID. Resisting." Miller panted, opening the back door of his cruiser. "Guy thinks he's a lawyer. Refused to identify himself during a suspicious person stop." Jenkins looked at Thorne. She saw the quality of the wool coat. She saw the calm intelligence in his eyes. She looked at the suspicious item, a coffee cup left on the bench. "Sir," Jenkins said, addressing Thorne, "do you have ID on you?" "I do," Thorne said calmly. "It is in my inner jacket pocket." I attempted to explain the Fourth Amendment requirements to your colleague, but he was uninterested in the law. Jenkins looked at Miller. "Kyle, did you have PC probable cause?" "I had a refusal to ID," Miller snapped. "That's obstruction." "That's not how it works, Kyle," Jenkins whispered, trying to de-escalate her own partner. "If there's no underlying crime, he doesn't have to ID." "I'm taking him in," Miller said, slamming the door on her concerns. "He wants to play games. We'll play games at the station. He can sit in holding until he remembers his name." Miller shoved Thorne into the back of the cruiser. The plastic seat was hard, the space cramped. Thorne maneuvered his tall frame into the awkward position, his shoulders straining against the handcuffs. The door slammed shut, sealing him in the cage. The smell of stale sweat and industrial cleaner filled his nose. Through the plexiglass divider, Thorne watched Miller get into the driver's seat. The officer was breathing heavily, still riding the high of the confrontation. He turned to Jenkins, who was standing outside the window, looking worried. "I got this, Sarah. Go handle that domestic on Whacker. I'm transporting." Jenkins hesitated. She looked at Thorne in the back seat. Thorne met her eyes and gave a barely perceptible nod as if absolving her of what was about to happen. She stepped back and Miller threw the car into drive. The drive to the 1st District station took 15 minutes. Miller didn't speak. He blasted the radio sports talk, trying to drown out the silence coming from the back seat. Thorne sat perfectly still. He wasn't thinking about the discomfort. He was thinking about the phone call he would make. He was thinking about the conversation he would have with the chief of police. He was thinking about Officer Miller's pension. "You comfortable back there, counselor?" Miller taunted, glancing in the rearview mirror as they hit a red light. Thorne didn't respond to the taunt. He simply said, "Officer Miller, for the record, I am requesting that you preserve all body camera footage and dash camera footage from this encounter. Consider this a formal preservation notice." Miller laughed. A short, sharp bark of a laugh. Yeah. You'll get your day in court, pal. Hope you can afford a lawyer." The irony was so thick it nearly choked the air in the car. Thorne closed his eyes. Afford a lawyer. He was the man who supervised every prosecutor in the state. He was the law. The squad car rolled into the sally port of the 1st District station. The heavy metal gate clattered shut behind them, cutting off the sunlight. This was the belly of the beast, the transition point where citizens became inmates. Miller parked the car and killed the engine. He got out, adjusted his belt, and opened the rear door. "Let's go. End of the line," Miller said. Thorne swung his legs out. His knees were stiff. He stood up, towering over Miller again. He walked calmly toward the intake door, guided by Miller's hand on his tricep. They walked through the secure hallway, the buzz of the electronic locks marking their progress. They entered the booking area. It was a busy morning. A few drunks from the night before were being processed out, and a shoplifter was arguing with a sergeant. The air smelled of coffee and floor wax. Behind the high desk sat Desk Sergeant Thomas Kowalski. Kowalski was a dinosaur. He had 35 years on the job. He had white hair, a mustache that looked like a push broom, and eyes that had seen every lie ever told in the city of Chicago. He was 2 months away from retirement. He was drinking coffee and reading the sports section when Miller walked in with his collar. "What do we have, Miller?" Kowalski asked, without looking up, his voice gravelly. "Disorderly conduct. Refusal to ID. Resisting." Miller recited his mantra. "Guy wouldn't show ID in the park, acted like he owned the place." "Name?" Kowalski asked, picking up a pen. "John Doe for now. Refused to state it." Kowalski sighed. He hated John Does. It meant extra paperwork. He finally looked up. "All right, buddy, let's cut the crap. What's your—" Kowalski stopped. The pen fell from his hand. It clattered onto the desk, the sound echoing in the sudden silence of the room. Kowalski squinted. He blinked. He leaned forward over the high desk. He looked at the man in handcuffs. He looked at the suit. He looked at the face that had been on the nightly news 3 days ago announcing a new anti-gang initiative. The blood drained from Sergeant Kowalski's face. He turned pale, then a shade of gray. "Miller," Kowalski whispered. His voice was trembling. "Yes, Sarge, I'm going to throw him in cell 2 while I write this up." "Miller," Kowalski said louder this time. He stood up. "Take those cuffs off." Miller frowned. "What no, Sarge? He's uncooperative. I need to process him. Take the goddamn cuffs off right now." Kowalski roared, his voice cracking with panic. The entire booking room froze. The shoplifter stopped arguing. The other officers looked over. Miller was stunned. "Sarge, what is wrong with you? This guy is a suspect." Kowalski walked around the desk. He moved faster than he had in 10 years. He approached Thorne, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender and apology. He looked at Miller with a mixture of pity and absolute horror. "You don't know who this is, do you?" Kowalski asked Miller. "He's a guy loitering in the park," Miller said, but the doubt was starting to creep in. He saw the fear in the sergeant's eyes. Kowalski turned to Thorne. "Mr. Attorney General, sir, I don't know what to say." The words hung in the air. Attorney General. Miller felt the world tilt on its axis. His stomach dropped through the floor. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. He looked at the man in the handcuffs, the man he had shoved, the man he had taunted. Thorne looked at Kowalski. "Hello, Sergeant. I believe your officer here has arrested me for drinking coffee." "Unlock him!" Kowalski screamed at Miller. "Unlock him now!" Miller's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the key into the handcuffs. He fumbled, dropped the keys, picked them up. His breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. "Attorney General. Oh my God." He finally managed to turn the lock. The cuffs clicked open. Thorne brought his hands forward. He rubbed his wrists where the red indentations were clearly visible. He adjusted his suit jacket. He smoothed his lapels. He turned to Officer Miller. Miller couldn't meet his eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terror of a man watching his future incinerate. "Officer Miller?" Thorne said, his voice quiet, deadly calm. "You asked for my identification. I believe now is the appropriate time to provide it." Thorne reached into his inner pocket. He pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. The gold badge of the Illinois Attorney General gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Next to it was his ID card. Marcus Thorne, Attorney General, State of Illinois. Miller stared at the badge. He couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. I didn't know, Miller stammered. Sir, I didn't know. That, Thorne said, is exactly the problem. You didn't know who I was, but you treated me like a criminal because of how I looked. If I were a plumber, would I still be in those cuffs? If I were a teacher, would I be in a cell right now? Thorne turned to Kowalski. Sergeant, I want the watch commander down here. I want the captain called, and I want the digital copies of the booking report started. Do not delete anything. Sir, Kowalski said, wiping sweat from his forehead. We can release you. It was a mistake. A misunderstanding. We don't need to file. No. Thorne cut him off. You will process this arrest. You will generate the report. Officer Miller believed he had probable cause. Let him put it in writing. I want everything documented. Every single word. The 1st District Station went into meltdown. It is difficult to describe the level of panic that ensues when a police department realizes they have falsely arrested the highest-ranking lawyer in the state. It's not just fear. It's an existential crisis. Phones were ringing off the hook. Lieutenants were sprinting down hallways. The captain, a man named Robert Halloway who was hoping to make deputy chief next year, was driving 90 miles per hour toward the station, screaming into his Bluetooth headset. Thorne was ushered into the captain's office, not a cell, but he refused the offer of water or coffee. He sat in a chair, waiting. He wasn't being arrogant. He was being evidence. He needed his demeanor to remain unimpeachable. Officer Miller had been banished to the break room. His gun and badge had been taken by Sergeant Kowalski just for safety while they sorted this out. Miller sat at a plastic table, his head in his hands. Other officers walked by, whispering. They knew. Everyone knew. Dead man walking, someone muttered. Miller didn't argue. He replayed the morning in his head. Why didn't I just walk away? Why did I have to be right? 20 minutes later, Captain Halloway burst into the office. He was out of breath, his tie crooked. He looked at Thorne, then at the red marks on Thorne's wrists. He closed his eyes for a second, praying this was a nightmare. General Thorne, Halloway said, breathless. I cannot apologize enough. This is a catastrophic failure of judgment by my officer. It's not just judgment, Captain, Thorne said coolly. It's training. It's culture. Your officer stopped me because I was a black man in a nice coat sitting in a park. He escalated because I knew the law. He arrested me because his ego was bruised. He will be dealt with, severely, Halloway promised. Look, sir, we can void the arrest. It never happened. I'll drive you back to your office personally. We can handle this internally. Thorne stood up. He walked over to the window that looked out onto the squad room. Captain, if you void this arrest, you are participating in a cover-up. I was handcuffed. I was placed in a car. I was transported. My freedom was restricted. That is an arrest. If you wipe the record, you are falsifying data. Halloway went pale. He realized then that Thorne wasn't looking for an apology. He was looking for a reckoning. I want the arrest processed, Thorne continued. I want to be released on a signature bond just like any other citizen charged with a misdemeanor. And then I am going to sue you. I am going to sue Officer Miller, and I am going to sue the city. Sir, please, Halloway pleaded. This will destroy the department's reputation. The media. The reputation was destroyed when your officer put handcuffs on an innocent man for drinking coffee, Thorne snapped. The media is just the mirror. If you don't like the reflection, don't blame the glass. Thorne walked out of the office. He went back to the booking desk. Fingerprint me, Sergeant. Take my mugshot. Sir, I can't, Kowalski begged. Do it, Thorne commanded. Follow the procedure. If you treat me differently than the kid from the South Side, you are proving my point. Book me. And so they did. The Attorney General of Illinois stood against the height chart. He turned to the left. He turned to the right. The camera clicked. Flash. Flash. That mugshot Marcus Thorne dignified, staring straight into the lens with eyes of fire, would become the most famous image in Chicago for the next decade. As he was finally released, signing his own recognizance paperwork, Thorne walked out the front door of the precinct. A massive crowd of reporters had already gathered. The video from the park had hit Twitter. It had hit TikTok. It was trending #coffeearrest. Thorne stopped on the steps of the police station. He adjusted his cuffs. The microphones were thrust into his face. "Mr. Attorney General, were you arrested?" "What happened?" Thorne looked at the cameras. "Today I was reminded of a hard truth," he said. "That credentials do not protect you from bias. That the law is only as good as the people enforcing it. And that we have a lot of work to do." The lawsuit landed on the city desk's lap on Thursday morning, less than 48 hours after the incident. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a masterpiece of legal drafting, Thorne vs. City of Chicago et al. It alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, false imprisonment battery, and malicious prosecution. But unlike most lawsuits that sought money, this one sought something far more expensive: structural change. The video footage from the bystander was released alongside the body camera footage which Thorne's office had demanded be made public immediately. The contrast was devastating. The public saw Miller's aggression. They saw Thorne's calm. They heard the specific citations of case law. They heard Miller's sneering dismissal. "Don't play lawyer with me." The internet exploded. "He told the AG not to play lawyer, LOL. This is the most satisfying 'I told you so' in history. Fire him. Arrest him. Throw away the key." But beneath the viral mockery, there was a seething anger. People realized that if this could happen to Marcus Thorne, it could happen to anyone. The comment sections were filled with stories, thousands of them, of regular people who had been bullied, ticketed, or arrested by officers like Miller, but who didn't have the power to fight back. Inside the police department, the investigation into Officer Miller was swift and brutal. Internal affairs, usually criticized for moving at a glacial pace, worked around the clock. They pulled Miller's file. They pulled his body camera history for the last 3 years. What they found was a pattern, a terrifying pattern. Miller had a habit of pretextual stops, stopping people for loitering or jaywalking, and then escalating the encounter until he found a reason to arrest them for resisting. He targeted minorities at a rate 4 times higher than his peers. He had 18 citizen complaints in 5 years. Most had been dismissed as unfounded or exonerated by a lax oversight system. But they couldn't dismiss this one. On Friday afternoon, the police chief resigned. He cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. He had lost control of his officers, and the Attorney General had exposed it on live television. Officer Miller sat in his union representative's office. The rep, a tough-as-nails lawyer named Stan, looked at the video. He looked at Miller. He closed the laptop. "Kyle, I can't save you," Stan said. "But I followed procedure. I thought he was suspicious," Miller cried. "You arrested the Attorney General for drinking coffee, Kyle. You told him he didn't know the law. You have 18 complaints in your file. They are going to feed you to the wolves to save the department. You're done. They can't fire me without a hearing." "Oh, you'll get a hearing," Stan said dryly. "And Thorne will probably testify. Do you want that? Do you want to be cross-examined by the best prosecutor in the state on public record?" Miller slumped in his chair. The reality finally hit him. It wasn't just his job. It was his identity. He was a cop. Without the badge, who was he? Just another guy in a world he had spent years bullying. The settlement conference took place 3 months later. The city of Chicago didn't want to go to trial. A jury trial with Marcus Thorne as the plaintiff would be a bloodbath. They wanted to write a check and make it go away. Thorne sat across from the city attorneys. They looked tired. They slid a piece of paper across the table. $500, $1,000, the lead attorney said. No admission of wrongdoing. Case sealed. Thorne didn't even look at the paper. He slid it back. No, Thorne said. Mr. Attorney General, that's a standard offer for a false arrest with no physical injury. I don't want your money, Thorne said. I want the reforms. I sent over a list of demands. Consent decree, mandatory retraining on the Fourth Amendment for every officer, a revision of the failure to obey policy, and independent oversight for citizen complaints. The attorneys looked at each other. Sir, those are policy decisions. We can't dictate that in a settlement. Then we go to trial, Thorne said, leaning back. And I will put the captain on the stand. I will put the former chief on the stand. And I will play every single video of Officer Miller's previous arrests that I found during discovery. I will show the jury that the city knew he was a danger and did nothing. The verdict won't be $500,000. It will be $50 million. And I will donate every cent of it to legal aid clinics that sue you. The room was silent. Thorne held all the cards. He wasn't bluffing. He was the house. 1 week later, the city agreed. The Thorne Decree was signed. It mandated that officers could not arrest for resisting arrest or failure to obey unless there was a separate independent criminal charge. It required officers to articulate reasonable suspicion on body camera before initiating a stop. It created a civilian review board with the power to fire officers. It was the most sweeping police reform in the state's history, triggered by a single cup of coffee. As for Officer Miller, the end was quiet. He was terminated for conduct unbecoming and civil rights violations. The union didn't fight it. He was stripped of his pension eligibility. The last anyone heard, he was working private security at a warehouse in Indiana, checking truck manifests at a gate. He had no authority. He had no power. He was just a man in a vest. 6 months after the arrest, Marcus Thorne returned to Millennium Park. It was another beautiful morning. The sun was shining on the bean. The tourists were out. Thorne walked to the same bench. He sat down. He placed a coffee cup next to him. He wasn't alone this time. A young black man, maybe 20 years old, was sitting on the next bench reading a book. He looked nervous as a police cruiser rolled slowly down the path. The cruiser stopped. 2 officers got out. They were new recruits. They looked at Thorne. They looked at the young man. They nodded politely. "Good morning, gentlemen," one officer said. "Morning," Thorne replied. The officers kept walking. They didn't stop. They didn't demand ID. They didn't assume the worst. They just patrolled. Thorne watched them go. He took a sip of his coffee. It tasted better this time. The system hadn't changed overnight. There were still bad stops. There was still bias. But the message had been sent loud and clear. We are watching. Thorne thought about the power he held. He had used it to crush a bad officer. Yes, but he realized that the real victory wasn't the firing of Kyle Miller. It was the fact that the young man on the bench next to him could read his book in peace. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the quiet moments of the innocent. It's about the right to sit in the sun without fear. Thorne finished his coffee, stood up, and walked back toward his office. There was work to do. This story reminds us that authority without accountability is just tyranny in a uniform. Marcus Thorne had the power to fight back, but millions of people don't. That's why we share these stories, to shine a light on the darkness. What would you have done if you were in Thorne's shoes? Would you have revealed who you were immediately? Or would you have let the officer dig his own grave, and do you think the settlement reforms were enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice served. Stay safe out there.